The revelation was both satisfying and deeply troubling. Richard had lived in the same apartment complex as Nancy for several more years after killing her. He had continued his normal life while her family and friends grieved. He had watched as police cars came and went, as investigators searched for clues, as Nancy's fiancé tried to rebuild his shattered life. The evidence suggested that Richard had planned the attack carefully. He had put tape on his fingertips to avoid leaving fingerprints, showing that he knew enough about police investigations to try to cover his tracks. His apartment had a direct view of Nancy's, and investigators theorized that he might have been watching her, perhaps developing an obsession that eventually led to violence. The motive remained unclear. Richard had no history of violent crime, though he had been arrested for drunk driving. There was no evidence that he and Nancy knew each other personally. The most likely explanation was that he had developed an attraction to her from a distance, watching her come and go from his window until his fantasies turned deadly. On a summer day in 2022, more than 50 years after Nancy's death, investigators held a press conference to announce that they had solved the county's oldest cold case. Mickey, now retired but still passionate about the case that had defined so much of her career, sat at the front of the room with Nancy's sister and her husband. The announcement was emotional for everyone involved. Nancy's sister had spent decades wondering if her sister's killer would ever be identified. She had almost given up hope that the case would be solved. The investigators had spent years, in some cases decades, working on a case that seemed impossible to crack. The solution brought a form of closure, but it wasn't the kind of justice that anyone really wanted. Richard was beyond the reach of human law, having died 25 years earlier. There would be no trial, no opportunity for Nancy's family to face her killer in court, no chance for a judge to impose a sentence that reflected the magnitude of his crime. Still, there was something powerful about finally knowing the truth. Nancy's family could stop wondering about the identity of the person who had taken their loved one away. The investigators could close a file that had haunted their department for half a century. And Nancy herself, in whatever way the dead can find peace, was no longer the victim of an unsolved crime. The case became a symbol of how persistence and advancing technology could bring justice even decades after a crime. The same techniques used to solve Nancy's case have since been applied to hundreds of other cold cases across the country. DNA databases that didn't exist in 1970, genetic genealogy tools that seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier, and the dedication of investigators who refused to give up had combined to solve what once seemed unsolvable. Nancy's story reminds us that some crimes are too significant to be forgotten, no matter how much time passes. The young court reporter who fought so bravely for her life in 1970 had finally received the justice she deserved, even if it came 5 decades too late.